All right, so the first thing that we need to do after we load Android Studio and we downloaded the Libgdx setup, we need to go ahead and open up the Libgdx setup, and we get our pop-up window. Now, there's a number of things that we need to fill out. The name, this is going to be like the full name of our project. So give it the name of the game that you're going to be creating. No spaces, all undercase. I'm just going to call it Redbeard Run. You guys can call it the name that you have. The package, this is where your main game class is going to reside. This is usually the company's website address or URL, or your personal URL. But it's in reverse, so I just do dot and then give the name, and that would be fine. When you actually have, if you had a website, that's the name of the website you would want to do. Your game class is going to be the name of your game. So this is the class that opens up, and you are starting to control your program from that main game class. So this is what we want to open. Now we got to give it a destination of where we want that whole package to reside. I want it to be in my desktop. You might have an asset folder or something. On my desktop, I actually want a new folder, and I'm going to call it let's call it Redbeard Run, and I'm going to go ahead and open that. That's where I want it to save everything that I create. The next thing is that we have to give a path to our Android SDK. Now, your guys' systems may be a little bit different. You're going to have to locate it. Usually the best place to start, if you're working on a Mac, it's going to be in your libraries under your username, under Android, and then you can just find the SDK. For here, on Windows, you're going to want to go Windows, your user, find your name, go to App Data, then Local, and then Android, and then once you get in there, you're going to see your SDK. So this is my entire path structure to get there. So on GDX, when I go to Browse, I'm going to go to the users. So users, my name, and app data, local, Android. I'll go ahead and open it. And then there's my SDK. So now that I have a path to it, that's what I want. Now, here you have your sub-projects. You can choose. You will always have a core, and that's where you're going to put all your code, but you can have it where it is creating launchers for different systems that you're using. However, if you're trying to do anything iOS that is entirely different, it's not Java, HTML, you would have to play around with JavaScript and CSS and HTML code. We don't really need that. The desktop module and the Android module are what we want to play with. And then we have extensions. This is additional software libraries that we can load. So we do know that we want collisions, physics-based collisions, so we're going to have Box2D selected. We're going to have tools selected, which gives us additional features for being able to create like bitmap fonts, things like that. We are going to be using AI in our game. We are going to be building it using an Ashley structure. We do want to use the free type generator. And we can go ahead and select Box 2D lights. This is if you guys wanted to try to do any lighting system. Bullet is for 3D physics. So you're either going to use Box 2D or you're going to be using Bullet. You're not really ever going to be using them at the same time. Okay? After that, you're just going to go ahead and click Generate. You're going to get a pop-up that asks if you want that you have a more recent version of the Android build tools than the recommended. You want to use the most recent version. We're going to go ahead and say yes. and that our Android API is more recent, we're going to go ahead and say yes. We're going to downgrade a couple things once it actually gets opened. All right, so this is going through and loading all of our stuff. We just kind of wait for it to finish. It's going to build our file structure in there for us. If you get any sort of pop-up, you're just going to allow it to happen. So this is downloading any of the newest stuff. Your Gradle setup will stay current. It's going to use Gradle to keep everything in sync. So if they make any changes to the base software, that's why we load it this way. So we'll load all the libraries, everything for us. We just need to start writing the code. All right, so once you see this build successful, we know that we got it. And then it can tell us, how we want to open it, if we're using Eclipse, IntelliJ IDEA, or the NetBeans. But since we're using Android Studio, it's kind of already set up. So all we need to do is just open up Android Studio, wherever I put it. There we go. All right, so I'm going to open up Android Studio. And we have to do a couple settings to make sure that we're good, and then we can test it out. I don't need the tips. Okay. All right. So now this is showing our stuff. Let me go ahead and open up. So once it's loaded, we're going to open up that file that we just did. And we saved it. I saved it on my desktop. Oh, somewhere on my desktop. Where did I save it? There it is, Redbeard Run. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and click on that and click OK. And we want it just to be in this window. Usually the very first time that you're building it, it's going to take longer. Afterwards, it's much faster. Anytime now. Okay, this is going to pop up, and if you go to the 4.4, it is going to give you all kinds of issues. So you're just going to say, don't remind me again for this project. Libgdx has certain versions where it works well. The first thing that we need to do is we need to go into the Gradle scripts. We're going to go into our build.gradle. Now what this does is this helps make sure that everything is the same versions. Let me make this a little bit bigger. I'd love to. All right, so what we need to do is we're looking for the Libgdx version that's 1.9.8. Our Gradle version is going to not be 3.1.0. We need to change it to 2.3.3. Okay, and then we need to change in Gradle wrapper properties where it says this 4.6, we have to change this to 3.3. This will make it so that everything's going to work all fine with it. You'll get a pop-up that's saying that you need to sync. We're going to go ahead and sync. That's about the only time that you really got to play around with Gradle. So if you are dealing with a version that isn't working, but you know that there's a more stable version, you can downgrade it by using Gradle. I'll just wait for it to finish. Could not find method for Google. Let's go ahead and click on that. So that'd be here. That's what I can't find. You're just going to take that right off. it's still gonna sit there. I'm just going to error out one more time because I didn't delete the other Google. Alright, so it downloaded everything. Now it's doing a build on it, making sure that it's good. We're good. We'll go ahead and sync it again just and set it. Make sure that works. Alright. We are good. So we can go ahead and click our event log. We can close our build. Now, our code, this was the folder where it is. Our whole project is Redbeard Run. This is the website that I told you that was the package, and then this is our main game class. Okay. Now, Libgdx comes with a couple things. So each one of these is basically a module: Android, Core, and Desktop. We're going to do almost all of our code in Core. So Redbeard Run, this is the main game class, and Libgdx provides in an asset folder a JPEG, so we can actually run it on Android or on our desktop to make sure that it works. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to Edit Configurations, and we're going to set up our desktop module so that's going to work. So we go ahead and click the plus, and we're going to go down to Application, and this one we're going to change it to Desktop, give it a name. We want it to we want our working directory to be in the assets. Come on, work with me. We want it to be in the assets, and So we want to go into Redbeard Run. We want to go to Android, to Assets. That's where we want all the files for it to find them. And then we need to select the module that we want, which is going to be desktop. And then our, why are you doing that? Core source. This is the main class. Why are you doing that? We don't need that. Try to remember. Okay, let's go ahead and click apply. Click desktop. Yeah, it does need it. Edit configurations. Main class. Oh, that's why. Desktop launcher. We apply it, we hit OK. Okay, so now if we go ahead and click to run, we'll get a window that pops up. What is going on? Let me just try it with Android. Alright, let's try it with an emulator. it's working. I'm going to look at the desktop one. There's the main. Wow, this is really going slow. All right, that took forever. It doesn't normally take that long. I'm running this on my Surface Pro. It's a little bit older. So what we're looking at, this is the clear screen, and we see that it's loading the image in the corner. Okay, if we looked at our logcat, we could see what was happening. Now for the desktop, let's go ahead and try to run the desktop. That should be good. As we're going through this and starting to write the code, I will explain a little bit of the code that I'm using, but I am expecting that you guys will pull up the documentation and start reading about the different classes and stuff that we're using. All right, so this is the desktop module. This is running. It's running on a screen. That's just the clear, and then it's loading the image. Okay. So we could go ahead and stop it. Android Studio. All right, so it stopped. Android Studio allows us, when we're using Libgdx, is that we can write our code here, and it's running on the desktop. So, and I'll start explaining what each of these pieces do. Okay, so for using Android Studio, your friend is going to end up being in code whenever you need to re-indent the lines to make sure that it looks good. If you're wanting to comment with block comments, you want to implement methods or generate code, you can do that here. You can set up getters and setters, everything. So you want to start playing around with this. Okay, so when we're looking at our code, we have the bad logic JPEG that's in the assets folder, all of our maps, all of our animations, everything, our atlases that we're going to end up creating, all that's going to go in this Android folder. This is the resource folder that we're going to be using. We will end up using different things. The drawables, this we will eventually replace. This is for our actual icon for the game that will show up on like the phones. We will end up playing around with the Android manifest. It's an XML document so that we could make our game where it, say it only opens up in landscape and not any other state. We can play around with that. Okay, so this Redbeard run code, when we're looking at it, let me go ahead and make this full screen. Can I zoom in? On my Mac, I can just view. All right. So on the code, I should be able to. In the code, this is the main class. It's going to extend the application adapter. We are going to end up changing that when we start doing our screens. There is a sprite batch. And a batch, what it does is it takes everything that it needs to generate graphics for, and it does it all at once. If you were doing them all individually, it would be really labor intensive on the computer. So we batch it all together, because if you have, say, your game character standing in front of another screen, we don't need to render the entire background and then the player in front of it. We can render only what's not, the background that's not part of the player, and then the player in front of it. Okay. Texture, that image that was created, we're setting that up for it to be used, and then we are in the create. It's kind of like the main method. When you're working with Android and specifically Libgdx, there are a number of methods that we have to use. And we'll start tracking through those as we're building our screens. So we need to do an initial creation of this stuff. And then when we're done, we have to dispose of anything that we no longer need. Now, for Android run, when Android's running, when you actually are exiting out of the game, you have to let the program know that you no longer need those things. So when we close the game, we're no longer going to need to have a batch, so we can go ahead and dispose it. We don't need to store that texture. Now, a JPEG, a PNG, all of that is really just a texture. There are different ways that we can create stuff, but this is where we're kind of starting from. So when we are playing around with this, the image, we give it that location. Now the internal path, that is that asset folder that I told you about, and I'm just typing in the name. Libgdx gives us a lot of different ways that we can access the files and use them. As long as you're using that assets folder, it makes it very easy to put that in there. So if I needed to have, say, all of my textures organized into a folder structure, I can go ahead and do that. In the render, this bit of code right here, first we're clearing any color. So that's why it goes with the red. I could change this to a different color and we could see it run a little bit different, and then I am clearing the color. After that, that's when I actually start batching the stuff. So anything that needed to be drawn will go in between the batch begin and batch end. So I could draw an image, I could draw a character, I could draw the background, and it's going to work in the order that I give it to the batch. So if I say batch and then I give it the background, and then I give the player, and then I have the tree that he's standing behind in front of it, it's going to draw it in that order. It's going to put it all together and then draw it all at once. Okay, so render gets called continuously. It's not just doing it once, it's doing it many times. Create is only getting called once, and dispose is only getting called once. Okay, so if I want to start changing this, this is where we're going to have to start, and then we are going to back out. Let me exit the presentation mode. So once we get out of that, this is really get me back to normal. There we go. Okay, so once we need to view the project. Okay, so if we need to create other folders, which that's what we're going to do, is we're going to do this only in the core. We're going to start creating a lot more folders for the different screens that we need, any components when we start building in Ashley, and actually just start building this up. So I'm just kind of giving you guys a familiarization of how Libgdx is running. Once we get the screen set up, we'll start printing out a bunch of log messages so you guys can see the order of what happens when it's running in an emulator. Okay.